Hello everyone. It's my enormous pleasure to be here talking to Angela. We did something like this in Gulgong for her first book, Night Blue, so it's nice to be back home. Because this is a launch, I just have a few little words to say. Angela's first novel, Night Blue, told the story of Jackson Pollock's infamous painting, Blue Poles, from his wild splashing of paint in his American studio to the Whitlam government's purchase of the painting for our new National Gallery. Angela found a daringly imaginative way to fictionalise that story by giving Blue Poles a voice to tell its own poignant life story. I've found, beyond expectations really, that Night Blue has haunted me for 2 years, making me look at art differently as Blue Poles did 50 years ago. It tells us that a painting is not just a passive creation, but it is in dialogue with its artist and also with its observers. So I've been waiting to see what Angela wrote next, and I'm really thrilled to find that she has developed her technique and her style by turning to the 19th century French artist Paul Cézanne and his wife and model Hortense Cezanne. She's done the same but completely different with this book. You can see the two books are by the same author, but she's really taken off in different ways. So it's a wonderful book to talk about. The Sitter, as Dan said, it's an exquisite short novel in which a writer, known as the writer, is working on a book about Hortense. As the writer brings her to life in her imagination, Hortense steps out of her portraits and becomes a character in the novel, and in fact the narrator of the novel, turning her eyes back on the writer. This is a seductive, mysterious and very beautiful piece of writing about the creative process, among many other things, and Angela has woven a double portrait that hangs together with the delicacy of gossamer and yet is as believable as we are sitting in this room. So Angela, I'd like to congratulate you on this very fine and original piece of work and declare The Sitter launched.
Thank you.
I'll give you a chance to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Susan.
My great pleasure. First of all, thinking about your two books together, why is it that art is so far what has inspired and stimulated you to write fiction?
I think it's the individual story of both those. There's two individual stories in this, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and both of them are really about narrative and the strength of narrative. And with Blue Poles, it was part of my childhood really, that story. So the story of Blue Poles coming to Australia and the whole country talking about the painting and being polarised by it was something that happened when I was about 11, I think. And, you know, I just kind of always thought, I guess not always, I had no idea I was going to write about it, but it drew me in to write about that one. And with this one, I was still working on the Night Blue story when I saw this painting and others, a number of the other portraits.
Where are they?
Hortense. Well, this was actually in Paris, and it was a exhibition of Cezanne's portraits, not all of them, but a selection, and there were probably about 6 of these of his wife. And again, narrative drew me in because I found out that they had a very unhappy marriage. I mean, she looked just as absolutely so unhappy in the portraits, different in each one, unhappy but also a sort of emptiness, but also a sense of possibility, which I felt was the genius of Cezanne, really. I mean, the portraits are amazing. And I just thought, oh, how did she feel? So both times, I can't really say, oh, I'm a writer who will always draw inspiration from paintings, but it's happened twice.
Mm.
Yeah.
Good choices. I think before we talk more, you might just give us a reading to give us a flavour of what you've done with these characters.
So I'm going to read from the beginning of the novel. From the window of a hotel room in Paris, a view of rooftops, the brown river, a cobblestoned street, one corner of a scaffolded, burnt-out church. It is a morning in March 2020, and the air holds a breath of warmth. The sky is a pale, hopeful blue. Normally on such a morning that is chilly but nevertheless heralds the first hint of spring, the street would be almost crowded, the mood bordering on flamboyant, as the first hint of spring is more a cause for celebration than spring itself. But this morning, from this window, just 3 people can be seen in the street. 2 women walk side by side, each carrying brown paper bags of groceries, each wearing a blue surgical mask. A small child strides out ahead of them, stopping every now and then to gaze with curiosity at the cobblestones, as if the cobblestones are marvellous, as if the cobblestones possess some secret that will any moment make itself known. The window through which this scene is being viewed is tall and graceful, with a suggestion of something lacking, an almost imperceptible narrowness to the design that suggests, perhaps, that generosity must be tempered with humility. Its glass is clean, flawless, except for a crack running from the lower left corner towards the centre, a crack that looks like a lightning bolt. Not the zigzag representation of a lightning bolt, but a real one. It has a real lightning bolt's meandering beauty and unwavering sense of purpose. The air inside the room is without a season. A temperature gauge hidden somewhere in the room or in the innards of the building itself ensures this. The chilly air from outside comes in through the crack in the window, just a little of it, seeking warmth. The neutral air from inside the room wafts out through the crack in the window, just a little of it, seeking adventure. In and out the air goes, in and out. There are 2 people in the room. A woman in her 60s stands at the window. She has just taken in the view as I have described it. The 2 women in the street, their brown paper bags of groceries. From the top of one protrudes something leafy, from another a baguette. The child striding ahead of them, full of curiosity and an easy confidence. The woman at the window has long greyish silver hair, streaked here and there with black. It looks like the remnants of a fire, soot and half-burnt logs arranged into something smooth and almost pleasing. The sunlight streaming in the window highlights the tiny lines that fan out from the corners of her eyes and around her lips. The other person in the room is me, Marie Hortense Cezanne. You may recognise my last name. Yes, that Cezanne. The French painter Paul Cezanne was my husband. Arguably most famous for painting apples, he painted my portrait far more times than he ever painted apples. 29 times to be exact. It is March 2020 and I am here in this hotel with the woman with the silver black hair and the lined lips, in the city where I worked as a bookbinder and an artist's model over 100 years ago, where I met my husband and gave birth to our son, and where I spent back-breaking hours sitting for my husband as he painted my portrait, while the sky slid by through the window, blinking day, blinking night. The birds in that sky were always happy. As I sat, I had thoughts, such as this observation about birds, that never made it into any one of those portraits. My husband used to say that if he couldn't find in himself a feeling for a part of the subject he was painting, then he was compelled to leave that section of the painting blank. In the portraits of me, there are many blanks. I am here in Paris. I keep reiterating this. Do I fear that any moment the fact might be taken from me? The city where I lived from the age of 8 on and off until my death in 1922. My grave is here in Père Lachaise Cemetery, where in summer the trees are weighed with brightness and children play hide and seek among the headstones. But I am not interested in graves. I am not interested in death. At least not as much as I am interested in the woman standing beside me at the window, who draws from me a strange desire that glitters and tumbles like a ball in a game, just out of reach.
So there you have a lot of the pieces that will be explored in the novel. I'd just like to know a bit more about Hortense and her relationship with Cezanne. 29 portraits. She says at one point that she thought that sitting was a form of freedom, but it actually became a trap for her. Do you know from your reading whether she enjoyed sitting at the time? She doesn't look comfortable in the portraits mostly.
Do you know, there's not very much about her. So there's really only what people thought of her and observed, I guess. But and really the paintings, I didn't read anything that said, except to say that she was a very patient sitter. That's what they said. That's what was said about her. Was that true? I don't know.
Yeah.
But so I just imagined what she might feel like, and she came from a working class background. She was a bookbinder. She was used to hard work, and so I thought, well, maybe at first it seemed like a good thing. All I have to do is sit here, a rest. But then she felt trapped.
She's always got a fairly blank face and rather pursed lips, and her hands neatly folded in her lap. It's not a relaxed pose.
No, it's not, is it?
And yet you say they're all a bit different.
Yeah, she's sort of virtually unrecognisable from one. I mean, not totally unrecognisable, but really she's very different in each one. But I think that's probably more Cezanne than because of her, her having a different expression or something. It's what he was experimenting with, perhaps.
He said, and you quote this, I paint a head like a door, meaning he gives a person's face the same attention as he might give a door in another painting, which is really interesting. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Well, I think that's what people think he meant by that. But he was also very interested in areas of colour, just placing areas of colour. I don't sort of claim to understand how he might have been really thinking about his paintings, but he did say that about, he needs to feel each brush stroke, which I found quite useful in this story.
So does your writing mimic his painting style in some way? Did you talk about the empty spaces and you talk about the paint strokes and were you thinking about that stylistically?
I guess I was. That hadn't really occurred to me, but I did think a lot about space and how, the novel's about two women who each have a difficult event, I guess, in their past. Hortense just has a lot of difficulty. And I wanted to see if they could each find a way of inhabiting a new space, perhaps. in relation to their past.
And find that together in relationship to each other?
Well, through the story, I think they help one another reach a little bit further in their own lives and in their own stories.
I must say, when I started the book, I thought, well, this is going to be another of those books where Angela discovers the life of Hortense. I'm going to call her Hortense.
Yeah.
If I may. I feel more comfortable. Anyway, because she speaks with she speaks vernacular English.
Exactly.
There's nothing French about Hortense in the book.
Yeah, that's
or
true.
at least her speech. What was I saying? We think that you're going to sort of tell us her story and bring her to the forefront of her life with Cezanne, but in fact, she's the narrator and she becomes more interested in the life of the writer. And that is a very interesting turn to me, and it's as we've said, they're looking at each other, but you only use the sort of outlines of her life, really, although there has been a biography and you read that. But it's really this lovely sort of filigree of details about them that you use for your own purpose. Let's just talk about the writer. She's there working on her book. She works on her book about Hortense in her home in Bondi and in Paris in 2020. And I just wondered, are you the writer?
Somebody else asked me this. You know how Hortense says she's herself and she's not herself in this story because she's been filtered through time and through the paintings and through the writer's story or the writer's work on her. So I would say, there are facets of me, of course, in that character. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
but
I think that's inevitable.
Yeah, of course. But I don't think of her as me. No.
All right. Yes. Okay. Well, we'll leave that there. Maybe more will come out. But I did wonder if the book sort of does reflect your writing process.
Absolutely. And I wanted to explore, create what creativity could be or might be, and so what better way for me than to have as my main one of my main characters a writer. It's not just because I haven't made her a writer because that's easy, I know how to write that. It's because I want to explore it and I want to look at it. So yeah, I guess it is in a sense having her separate from me, but being me too. Yeah.
Okay. You've set the book in Paris just as COVID starts to break out and keep everyone inside. You've also got the wonderful, evocative, burnt out Notre Dame with its collapsed spire. Why did you choose that as the setting?
I started it before COVID, and I really wanted them looking at that church, that burnt church. As soon as that happened, I knew, that's going to be in the novel somehow. I mean, I didn't know what the exact story was going to be. I just had an idea of these two characters in a hotel room looking at it at Notre Dame, and I wanted them to be sort of stuck in that room, but I couldn't think of any reason for them to be. And then the pandemic came. So it was kind of terrible for the world. But yeah, so
quite useful. Yeah. And also, as well as keeping them sort of locked in the room together, and it gives the novel a kind of feverish, dreamlike quality. There's memory and hallucination all mixed up together, and imagination, and I thought you created the tension of that sort of dream state almost very well. Did you work hard at creating the mood of the book. That it's, I mean, you've created a sense of how the imagination works, which I thought was quite brilliant.
Thank you. Well, I worked very hard on the book. You know, I did many drafts, etc. But I was just so interested in following it, you know, and working out how I could write a story that was compelling, that was light, you know, that felt that I wanted the prose to kind of feel spare and light, but that had depth and a complexity. So, and that talked about things like creativity and how do we sort of meet our past and sort of coexist with it in new, exciting ways. Yes, that was, once I had the end, once I knew that end scene, I could then see where the other pieces might fit a bit better, and also, you know, I had a notebook full of notes, and I'd see what, oh yes, that can belong. And there, I made use of objects, so, and also elements. So there's water, there's the sea, there's the river, there's the creek in the story, the backstory of the writer, and then there's boxes. So I made sure that I could link the stories just through that symbolic objects, and it saved on a lot of words, really, by doing that. I thought, I felt.
Oh, interesting. You do write short novels. Do you write more and pare them back, or do they come out short?
I think they come out short. I'm a spare writer. They come out short, but then I'll have all these notes, you know, and I'm sort of, some of them will be added and some won't. But no, I don't write sort of like, you know, 80,000 words and then pare it back. No.
It's a great skill. I love a good short novel. One of the things that links the two women, the writer is a recent widow with a daughter, and both women have been wives and mothers and suffered loss and grief. And you may not want to say too much about that, but motherhood and loss are two of the subjects that run through the book. Was that always an important part of it for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I knew that was there. And yeah, I don't really know how to talk about that because, you know, this is the thing with this sort of conversation, is that nobody's read the book and you want people to read the book.
Yeah,
so
I'm not going to draw you out on that, but I just think it's interesting to know that they both have histories that sort of bind them together, and, and emotionally it's important. You did some other reading. It's interesting because your writer in the book reads some of the books that you read. That's right. And because they're books that I love, I'm going to ask you a little bit about them. The writer's in her room in Paris, I think, reading The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard and Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency by Olivia Laing. Now, why were those two books important enough to actually plant them in the novel itself?
They just seemed to fit. The Bachelard one came in when I was, I don't know, halfway through or something. And because I realised it's about space, and it's for me, I could use what he says about space. There's this quote at the beginning of the book that says, "Shade too can be inhabited," and to me that spoke to you know, what these two characters could inhabit their own shade, their own, hidden spaces, basically. Secrets, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And Olivia Laing, I read and reviewed that book. Does anyone know Olivia Laing's writing? She's an English writer on the arts, and she also had a novel a few years ago called Crudo, which you mentioned here too. But art what's it called? Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency. It's about how artists respond to crises, both in their own lives and in the world. And it was so appropriate to this novel, isn't it? She's a terrific writer.
So I read that during lockdown, and I sort of knew fairly quickly that I wanted it to be in the book, but it wasn't published until April 2020, and it's March, so that's why she goes into Shakespeare and Co, and they've got an advanced copy, and so because
that's very precise of you.
Well, it had to be right.
That's great. That's good detail. There's also, this idea of fictionalising lives. The writer also starts to tell her own story in writing, but in the third person, and she writes about herself under the name of Georgia. Can you explain that a little bit? So she's writing several things at once, isn't she? She kind of gets distracted from Hortense's story.
From that, she realises for various reasons, she realises that she's not really going to pursue that story about Hortense. I'm calling her that now, Hortense.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm meant to be the one who speaks French. You said you don't speak French.
Anyway, I'm just pretending. Oh God, what was the question again?
Writing about herself.
Yes,
as Georgia.
That's right. I wanted her. She says something about, in order to see ourselves in the past, we must make strangers of ourselves, she says. And so she calls herself a different name because she wants to see herself in the past. Is this what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just find that it was enjoyable to write, but it allowed me to go into a space, as far as where the setting was, it was actually my childhood. And so even though it's not it's not the story, what happens in that place is not what actually happened in my childhood. It's definitely set in that house, at that farm, with quite a few siblings there. So, in fact, they're uncountable. She can't count them. So it's a little bit like a dream, really.
Yeah.
It's written in. But I do want to say that it's when I talk about this book, it starts to sound like it's just going to be too hard to understand or follow, but it actually is.
It's not complicated. It has these layers and these interwoven stories, but it all makes perfect sense.
I think that helped me, putting that little distance between the writer and the person she used to be also helped me. But I think it's also just something about our past is really a story, isn't it?
That's right.
That we're constantly sort of revising that story. So why not kind of make her write it as a story with a character who's kind of not her?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think even when you're writing deliberately autobiographical material, it's still a construct of yourself. It's not. It's never the whole person, is it? But rather beautifully, and I only realised this later, that Angela let her writer choose the name Georgia after the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, and then I realised, oh, their surname is O'Keeffe.
Yeah, I know. That's sort of
so it's kind of circular.
I just had a bit of fun with that.
Yes.
Especially because it's double F, you know.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you about the voice that you give, Hortense, because
that's the best yet.
Because it's not a French voice. It's very much a contemporary sort of vernacular English voice, you know, and she knows all about computers and all sorts of elements of contemporary life. And I'd like you to talk a bit about how you found that voice, and also, was it easier to create a voice for a woman in a portrait than it was to create one for an abstract expressionist painting? How do you approach that?
I don't know if it just sort of came to me. I don't know. Sorry. Both times it just came to me, but I don't think of her when I wrote that. I don't really think of her as in the portraits. She's sort of them, but she's not in them when I'm writing about her. Mm. But she's also filtered through the character of the writer. So she says, I exist here on the edge of the writer's mind. She says that a number of times. She's not a ghost. She's actually in the writer's mind. So she's sort of constrained by what the writer knows, in a sense. She can know some of her past, but not all of it. And she actually has trouble with French. And, you know, I do too. So I knew I couldn't really write this as simply the story of Hortense and, you know, Paul Cezanne as a biographical fiction, you know. I wasn't interested in doing that. I wasn't going to be able to be, so I had to do something else with it.
Hortense is very close also to her dressmaker. Sometimes we see her being fitted in a dress by the dressmaker, and the dressmaker says to her that Cezanne didn't get her or didn't understand her in his paintings of her, and she replies, I did not let myself be got, which I think is really interesting. What do you take from that? Was she holding back? Was she? What do you mean?
Well, obviously I made that up. But
oh, I thought it was a quote. I'm believing it all. Okay.
No, that's in the books about the paintings, and one of the books I read, there's a line that goes in. She's not recognisable from one portrait to the next, but there's one feature. The line of her top lip is the same in every portrait. And I thought, isn't that interesting? And I looked at some of them and I thought, that's a kind of a stubbornness, you know? So I just played around with that. Yeah. Okay. So I have no idea what she and her dressmaker talked about, of course. but I really like the idea of, there's all these sort of, that seem sort of outrageous stories about her, that she refused to come to Cezanne's deathbed because she had a pressing engagement with her dressmaker. And I thought, rather than try and sort of refute that, you know, in the book, why don't I just go with it? So I kind of have her, I wrote that scene where she doesn't go, and for some reason she didn't go, so they have there's a little bit in the book about the dressmaker.
Yes, and there's a lovely line from Hortense. By the time I got to Aix, he was dead. The room smelt of olives. And I thought, what a lovely thing to imagine. Because again, you couldn't know the room smelled of olives, but that is so evocative. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Absolutely typical of your beautiful writing. But just going back to Cezanne not getting her and her not allowing herself to be got, I wondered, is she evading the writer in the same way, not allowing the writer to capture her on the page, and therefore the writer has to turn to writing something else?
That is such a great idea. I didn't think of that, but I really love that observation, because I think, yes, the whole book's about, hiding secrets. It's also about biography. How can we ever assume to know anyone else? There's another line where Hortense says something about the writer saying she'd made up her mind. A fatal flaw in a writer, but what did I know? She says. So, in other words, this judging, that can close off art, I think, rather than leave it open.
And just before I turn to the audience for their questions, just one thought. There seems to be a whole sort of genre of books at the moment about bringing women to the forefront who've been lost in the stories of famous men. And some of you might have read Wifedom by Anna Funder. It's a book about George Orwell and his wife, who's kind of invisible in his work and in the biographies about him. And so she's written a book saying, well, this is patriarchy and this is what happens. The women are kind of made invisible. It's a very good book too. But I wondered if there is a feminist element to what you were trying to do, and even though Hortense does continue to evade us in some way, we are now very well aware of her through your book, and I'm interested to go and look at her a lot more. I just wondered if that was part of your purpose, to bring her out of the shade.
I just, the fact that she was unhappy, the fact that she looked unhappy in the paintings, and that she had an unhappy marriage, just made me want to write about her. And so, yes, I wanted to sort of see if I could explore what she might, how she might have been as a human, as a more, rather than a kind of stereotype, which is how she was viewed in most of the biographies. I don't think I'm doing anything new, though. Other people have done this. There's a really great book about the 29 portraits, and I forget her name, Susan something, and she talks about how there was a relationship. She's saying she wasn't just this sort of, like an apple. She was actually, they had a relationship, and you can see it in the paintings. It's there. And she has written a whole book about that. So, but yeah, I just wanted to get to know her in relation to within the story that I was creating. It was important that it was within this story. This is the container for it.
Yeah. All right. Well, if anyone has a question, we'd love to hear them, and I'll repeat whatever you say. Any thoughts? Yes.
Was this particular portrait important to you, of the 29 that we see of Hortense?
Just to repeat that, why did you choose this portrait out of all the 29?
It was my favourite. And there's a scene in the book where she describes the feel of that chair. And it's also the portrait that Rilke fell in love with. He went back to look at this portrait again and again. And it was at a time where everyone thought she was ugly and horrible, mostly. And he just completely raved about her. Yeah.
And when you say people thought she was ugly and horrible, based on what? Based on the portrait?
I think so, yeah. But also based on I mean, they said she was grumpy and sour. You know, she wasn't happy. So, in life as well as in the portraits, I think, these observations. But, you know, there's a lot of judgment in those observations too.
Was he treating her badly? Apart from making her sit endlessly?
Well, he you know, his father was a banker, and he had a stipend from his father to work as a painter. And his father didn't approve of him being a painter. He wasn't making much money from his work. But then he met Hortense, and they had a child, and they didn't get married, and he basically kept them secret. So there's another secret. And until the child was about, I think, 15, something like that, and then they sort of came clean and told the father, and they got married with his sort of blessing. But he was, Cezanne was worried about losing his allowance, which, you know, I mean, I can understand that he would be, it seems like his whole life was about his painting. So I don't think he probably couldn't see, you know, that she was unhappy. So I don't really know, you know, I mean, it depends who you are and what perspective you're looking at it, whether you'd say he was mistreating her. But she was certainly like a prisoner in a way, because she didn't have any means. She didn't have any money of her own, and you know, he didn't have to pay her to sit for all the paintings either. So she was sort of trapped in a way. But yeah, I think he was. I don't think he was like violent towards her. I never read anything about that at all. But he was grumpy.
We'll take this one and then up the back. Yes.
You said that your work wanted to explore the creative process, and so I was just wondering if there was any parts of your creative process that translate in this.
It's a question about Angela's own creative process.
Yeah, I think that I was able to see my creative process and kind of talk about it through this book a bit. Yeah, I mean, when you say process, it's not like... There's a little bit where the writer says, or Hortense says in observation of the writer, that she's... it describes her writing, and that's me, I think. You know, some days it's flowing, and, you know, and then other days it's deleted as soon as it sort of goes on there. And there's something else she said. Oh yeah, the writer calls it at the beginning of the book, the scrappy notes and bits of magic stage. And that's me too. I mean, I would never say that about my work, but it's kind of how I think about it, you know, when at the start of a project. Yeah.
Did you feel inhabited by your characters in the way that they inhabit each other? You know, is Hortense in your head all the time as you're going about between writing and...
She was a little bit, but I think it's more the story itself. The shape of it is more what I carry, and what it needs. I'm kind of asking what it needs, rather than what the characters might need. They're part of that, of course. But yeah, so they were there, for sure.
The question up there.
Do we know if there's living relatives of either?
Yeah.
Are there living relatives of Cezanne and Hortense?
I think so. There was I think like a great or maybe great nephew. I read a little bit about, I don't know how far back, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it's great or great, but he wrote a piece for one of the exhibitions, and he said that he remembered this really old lady, she died in her early 70s, who was really gentle with children. It was kind of one of the memories that he, well, the main one really, that he had of her. So I kind of did put that in, that she enjoyed.
So presumably there are descendants, but
yeah. Well, I thought about, you know, what is this some sort of, but I don't think it's anything that they would worry about.
Oh no.
Yeah. It's clearly fiction.
It would be lovely if they wrote to you and either said beautiful book or we're going to sue, or you'd sell a lot of books.
On the edge of someone's mind. How dare you?
Anyone else with a question? Well, up the back, yes.
It's sort of about that, you sort of just answered it, but I was going to say, do you feel any sort of intimidation in giving voice to someone that's so well known or someone that's so well known? How do you work through that in your writing process?
Just to repeat it, do you feel intimidated by giving a voice to someone who's well known, and how do you work through that?
Yeah, at times, and then I just think, okay, don't think about that, you know, don't think about that. But it's funny, I went, Jeff and I were in Paris just a month or so ago, and we went to the Musée d'Orsay and saw one of the portraits. I knew there was one there, and I felt shy going and standing in front of her. I felt kind of a bit shy and a bit sort of, I don't know, bit awkward or something, and she just stared past me. Like,
Did you want to have a chat with her?
No, not at all.
Feel she was a friend by now.
It was lovely to see her.
Yes. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
It's funny that you mentioned that she stared past you, because reading both your books, I feel like looking at art now, I don't think I'll ever look at it any different now. I feel like I'll probably be more connected to the art. I'd love to know, do you see art and feel more connected to it? I know you just said that she was looking past you, but all other art, do you feel like you have a relationship with art in that?
Yeah, maybe it's...
Does Angela feel more connected to art, having written about it and looked at it?
I'm glad you feel more connected.
I do.
I'm really, that makes me so happy.
I share that.
I think it might have changed a little bit. I think I'm a bit looser about it, you know, not so concerned with what I might be expected to feel. Yeah.
Because you haven't formally studied art,
No,
have you? But
no.
you've obviously got a great appreciation and interest in it.
Well, it seems like it, doesn't it? I do like art, yeah.
And I believe you've started on another novel.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say about that?
I don't want to say anything about it.
All right. Is it about
I just
art?
can't. I can't, really.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll have to wait a couple of years for that one. Well, Angela, thank you very much. Thank you for your beautiful book and lovely conversation.